Hello, contractors, and welcome to Toolbox for the Trades. My name is Jackie Yavell, and today I'm chatting with Chris and Joe Hoffmann, the CEO and COO of Hoffman Brothers in St. Louis and Nashville. I spoke with Joe and Chris about everything, how they joined their father's business in 2016 and how a decade later they have now built the business up to be a $160 million business, which is incredible. We talked about a ton of stuff: change management, project management, AI, private equity, all the good things. I hope you guys enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Chris Hoffmann and Joe Hoffmann, you are the CEO and COO of Hoffman Brothers in St. Louis and Nashville. Today, I'm going to be talking to you guys about how you're turning your family business into a service empire. I'm so excited to chat with you guys today. Welcome to the show. Chris, why don't you say hi first so the folks know what you sound like?
Sounds great. Glad to be here, Jackie. Excited to chat with you.
Thanks so much. And Joe, now you. Why don't you say hi to our wonderful audience who is listening in?
Thanks for having us, Jackie. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
I appreciate you guys coming on to talk with me because I know you are very, very busy. You guys have been incredibly busy in the time that you guys joined your father's business about a decade ago. And we're going to get all into that. But before we do, we're going to kick this off with an icebreaker. So both of you had careers prior to joining your family business in 2016. Chris, you were an officer in the Marines, and Joe, you were a sales engineer at Trane. You both have professional degrees. So I want to know what prompted you to join your dad's trades company, and Chris, potentially as the self-declared least technically inclined Hoffman. Why don't you answer that one first?
You know, it's funny. Our dad was like very rigid around like what he expected his kids to study if they went to college. It was like accounting or engineering or like become an attorney, right? So oldest brother was an engineer undergrad, became an attorney. My sister ended up going to med school. And like my dad, the whole time I was in college, he thought I was studying like engineering up until like graduation. It was like, surprise, I picked economics and I'm joining the Marine Corps. So why join the company? Well, I had just left the Marine Corps, was using the GI Bill for graduate school. It's kind of like a natural transition where I could retool and decide what the heck I wanted to do. And the great thing about business school when you're there full time is you can try different things. I interned in private equity and I worked for a big national bank while they were doing a co-op. And then, concurrently with this, I was showing up to my dad's office every week, engaging with him, seeing the business, learning how he thinks about it. And really, I think my dad really wanted this to stay a family business. And Joe and I were his youngest two kids. He put the full court press on us, right? Really wanted us to come into the business. And we were also excited by the opportunity the more we learned about the business. And so I think we ended up being a lot more aligned than we originally thought before we had put our heads together.
So Joe, what about you? You actually got into the trades. You were working at Trane as a sales engineer. So what prompted you to join the family business?
Chris and I are similar in a way in that when I was growing up, I never thought I would join the family business. It was originally the Hoffman Brothers was my dad and my uncle. And it was, a lot of family, cousins, not a lot of interest in getting into a family business situation. I had no idea, hey, would my cousins be involved? Would my uncle be involved? It was never a path that I really considered. After engineering school, my best opportunity, I got a couple different job offers, and it just happened to be working for Trane, an HVAC manufacturer. And that was my best job offer. It had nothing to do with, I had plans on going into the family business, but it just so happened to work out well from that perspective. After about 4 years working for Trane, I was in Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, so designing, selling commercial HVAC. Robert, our father, called me and said, hey, Joe, if you want to come back and work for the family business, now would be a good time. I was really just looking for an opportunity to get back home to St. Louis. A lot of friends, family. I missed them. Moved back home. Last day of work at Trane was on a Friday, and the next Monday, my dad had me in the office, so I didn't get no breaks. So I jumped right in, of course. Early 2016 is when I moved back to St. Louis.
Interesting. And you guys both made the decision to join independently of one another. Is that correct? Or did you guys confer with one another?
Say, yeah, hey, we spoke. We spoke about it, and there were conversations around other siblings and entering the business, and it's something we had some private family conversations around, like, hey, who's going to get into the business? Why? What are people's intentions? And joining the business, and it ended up, I think the right alignment was Chris and I joining the business around the same. We joined within a few months of one another.
For anyone here who is not familiar with the Hoffman Brothers, I don't know how you can't be, but in case you are not, today, the Hoffman Brothers is a $160 million business with several locations. But about 10 years ago, when you guys first joined, it was $9 million with about 45 people working for you. So really simple question, how the hell did you do it?
Jackie, when we joined the business, Hoffman Brothers did a lot of different things. We focused a lot on commercial. We focused a lot on residential. We did some new construction. We did a little bit of everything. It was all an HVAC company. Something that we noticed when we joined the business was, hey, we need to focus on one particular facet of the business. And we picked residential service replacement model on the HVAC side. And a part of that conversation and decision and getting the focus of the business was we joined a best practice organization, Nexstar, which I think really helped us. We just basic blocking and tackling one-on-one. We didn't do anything magical or anything that many others hadn't done. We just took the great playbook that Nexstar provided us and we implemented it and we executed. I think that's something we did really well, was executing the playbook that Nexstar gave us. And that's really what stemmed a lot of the growth that we've had since 2016.
If I were to add anything, I would say I wish there was when I talk to folks on their growth journey or would share sort of the story, and the headline sounds great, right? 9 million to 160 million. And I wish there was one thing that I could point to that's oh, if you do this, this is what unlocks all this value. But the reality in a business like ours, it's really doing 100 little things right every day over a long period of time that compounds. And Nexstar's playbook teaches you exactly that, right? And there's several other best practice organizations, but it really helped accelerate our learning to understand what are the processes that we can put in place that lead to the specific outcomes, measurable outcomes around things like conversion rates and average tickets and lead turnover rates. We needed a process playbook that allowed us to influence those things, those measures of success. And that playbook for us happened to be Nexstar. And we grabbed the playbook and just started running hard and fast at it.
I think the other thing, I'll give Chris a shout out here. What's led to a lot of this success? We've had a great leader in place, and my dad was willing to give up the keys right away and, hand Chris, the keys. Essentially, he's been leading our business since 2016. And I, give a big shout out to a big part of the success is the leadership at the top and the change that we're driving and making sure that we're, I talked about the Nexstar playbook and the implementation. Well, you have to have good leadership at the top driving that and getting people on board and pushing the ball in the same direction. And I think Chris has been a real pivotal piece of our growth over the years.
Okay, I love that. I love in-person real-time shout out. You guys are not the first person on this podcast. You're definitely not going to be the last who cites Nexstar as being one of those excellent resources that folks can use to implement those processes and workflows. I wanted to ask, what friction, if any, was there in implementing some of those processes? Because it sounds like when your dad was running the business with your uncle, you kind of doing a little mishmash of everything. What friction, if any, did you guys run into when you first started adopting that?
Super hard, right? I mean, it's people and change management. And I would say those are still our biggest challenges today, right? I mean, we're introducing change. We want to do things differently. We want to do things better. And that requires people to change and to understand and embrace this change. And those are the battles we fight today. A good example of where we messed up. I remember we sent everybody through, we had a trainer come on site, in 2016 and sent everybody through, and you pay a lot of money, right? I forget what it was then, but $20,000, you get a trainer on site and you send all your service department through this 3-day service system workshop. And, at the end of the 3 days, it was kind of ready, break, let's go out there and do this, right? And then a week later, everybody's doing the same thing they did. Nobody's using the tools. And the lesson learned there, really to circle back to Joe's comment earlier, is we needed to have field managers, all of our leaders bought in on the importance of the process. So after we train our team, our frontline team members, our field pros, to go and execute this service system, they then have managers and leaders who are reinforcing the training, doing one-on-ones, coaching to that process, right? But absent that, we just had, kind of a silly mistake to look back. We just thought we'd send everybody this training and everyone was going to embrace the change and show up the next day in a completely different way. And that's just not how people work. And so having the leadership people, the leadership team aligned around the process and how they can support the process is critical if you're going to be driving change in process.
And Jackie, this is what Chris just described is still an issue today. I mean, this is ongoing. We're still battling this every day. I wish I could sit here and say that, hey, no matter which of our, HVAC service professionals that you have to our house today, you're going to get the exact same experience. It's just not the case, right? But knowing that that's not the case and being intentional about that every single day, every single month, and that our team knows that, hey, this is important to us and we're going to keep talking about it and we're going to keep coaching to it. It's not just a one-time training and then we're going to forget about it, but it's just an ever-evolving challenge that isn't going to go away anytime soon.
I mean, it's the top thing we talk about on this show. I could probably rename the show Toolbox of the Trades, Change Management, how the hell to do it. And it's something that I struggle with even in my world, which is a little bit more on the corporate side. I'm curious how you guys handled, and first off, love hearing about mistakes. Love hearing about things that didn't work out the way you planned it to, because I think you guys have achieved such success. It's so great and refreshing to hear you talk about when things didn't go well. So keep doing that. I would love to hear how you guys, let's take that example, took all of our service tech, paid 20 grand for them to get this training. Within a week, it didn't stick. How did you guys assess and come together and like problem solve that? Like, I'd love to hear how that works, because you're not really working in a silo. You guys are working together and with family. So I imagine that retrospective on, hey, this didn't work, that probably was a group discussion instead of an individual thought experiment.
My dad was particularly frustrated, right? Because it's a big investment at a $9 million business or any business. If you're writing a $20,000 check and you're pulling your T out, like, heck, more expensive than the $20,000 is the 3 days of lost revenue where you're shutting down your service departments to run this training. So, I mean, it was certainly super frustrating. And on the family side, I think Joe, Robert, and I, Robert's our dad, we were all very aligned around the need. So there wasn't a wrangling the family to get the family on board with the change. It was really, how do we get the entire team to embrace it? And there was a ton of resistance. I mean, you'd have really influential field pros that had been around a long time with us that were just actively resisting the change and trying to undermine it during the training. And then you had managers that weren't all the way bought in. And back to what I would have done differently, doing it again, it would have been like having conversations with those influential individuals who are going to shape how others in the room perceive that training, how they receive it, how they embrace it, internalize it. Having those conversations in advance so that I had the champions, right? My influential champions that were aligned and supportive, and I had my managers aligned and supportive. I think that would have really just changed the way that was received.
Yeah, explaining the why behind the decision.
That's
Jack,
right.
I think in most businesses, any sort of transformational change where you're asking somebody to do their job different than they've done it every day for the last 20 years, even with the best change management, there's always going to be turnover. We definitely could have done better, but we had, a fair amount of turnover when we really laid out the expectations and said, hey, this isn't negotiable. This isn't just another training that you get to go and twiddle your thumbs at and ignore after the fact. And once our team realized that, hey, we're not going to stop talking about this and we're going to keep hammering this home, it did result in a little bit of turnover, but obviously that got us to a better outcome on the other side.
Generally, whenever I hear about turnover from folks like you guys, it's painful in the moment, but in the long term, it is usually a good thing, because then you get to find people that are bought into your mission and your vision.
Totally.
There's always things that we could do better. Some of the guys, if somebody departs, good riddance, but sometimes there's a man, I really wish, we lost one there, that we could have done a better job, to Chris's point. Like, how could we have gotten champions up front? What other conversations could we have had to get this person on board so we didn't have to lose them? There's always those regrettable people, but at the end of the day, it always shakes out.
I want to get a little bit more into the family dynamics, but before I do, Chris, you're the CEO. Joe, you're the COO. When you both joined in 2016, is this what you expected was going to happen? Or did you have something totally different in mind? Chris, why don't you go first?
I don't think we had I think a lot has happened over the last 10 years. It was not what I would have predicted in 2016. Chris would have predicted. But no, I mean, initially when I joined the business, so having a non-technical background, I was like, well, let me learn like the ops side of this thing. And really, I just shadowed my dad for almost 6 months. So I was like, I literally I'm going to sit on this table behind your desk, and I'm going to sit here every day. I'm going to go to meetings you go to, and I'm going to understand like how you think about the business and what you do every day. And then, to my dad's credit, I feel like you often hear about the patriarch who takes the keys with him to the grave and who's really slow to trust and empower. And Joe and I were incredibly blessed to have a dad who was willing to just thrust ownership, not just literal ownership of the business, but also just ownership of decision making. And it was something unique. And it's something that when I reflect on it today, and I have a lot of friends in family businesses across industries. And I think our dad is really unique with respect to just just his humility and his willingness to trust and empower his kids and not let his ego force him to stick in the seat at the top of the org chart until he's 90, right? And I'll let Joe talk about his role, but sales role, and Joe's an engineer by background, and Joe probably won't say this, but I will, but he was always the top performer fighting for number one with respect to sales results. And I think his ability to not only coach and lead the team, but actually model that he can do it as good as anybody with respect to sales, I think was just a huge credibility builder when you've got family stepping into a new business, and there's always concerns about nepotism and how are people going to receive us.
When I joined the business, it's more of a conversation around like, Dad, where do you need help? Where do you need me? And at the time we had 4 HVAC salespeople, and he said, Joe, we need help in HVAC sales. I said, we're understaffed and we're underperforming. And I said, well, Dad, what does that mean, underperforming? I don't know. We're just not selling enough. I'm like, okay, well, how do we define that, Dad? So, as I start digging in and learning from Nexstar, it's like, this is some basic, we didn't have real KPIs for our sales team. We didn't know who was the, when I started, it was who's the best sales guys. Well, Nick sells a lot, so he's our best sales guy. Well, like, how do we define that? So really, a big piece of this was going in and input, getting our sales tracking, putting in place batting orders and running bid. I spent probably, when I first started, 70% of my time was running bids, 30% of my time was managing the sales team. So I really got to learn the sales side, and the engineering background and selling commercial HVAC did help me on the sales side. Although sometimes my customers told me that I would get way too technical, and I lost a few sales talking over their heads, trying to get engineering technical about how these systems work. So learned a few lessons there, but yeah, I jumped in wherever I was needed and helped on the sales side. And, my roles evolved quite a bit, as Chris has as well, from 2016 to today.
It sounds like Robert was very open to you guys coming in, which is rare. Yeah. I've had stories on this show where people come on and say my parent or the person or my uncle or whoever I was taking over from was an active blocker in making that business successful. And we had to deal with that. So it sounds like you guys got pretty fortunate in that way. But that being said, 10 years working running a business with your dad, with your brother, with other family members, what advice would you give to folks who are also trying to do the same thing, trying to grow a family business, trying to build a legacy empire, kind of what you guys are doing right now with Hoffman Brothers?
I've seen family businesses, Jackie, where there's the second or third generation and there's 3 people with the title of CEO because all of them have too big of an ego. When you're stepping into a business, you just have to realize, like, hey, where can I add the most value? And strip away the ego, strip away the title, the need for the title. And it's like, I was completely okay with Chris stepping in and being the president of the organization, following my dad, because I knew Chris was going to be better at that than I would be. And I think that's where I see some family businesses fail, is like, hey, stepping into this family business, and what matters the most to me is my title and the authority. And it's at the end of the day, you just have to step back and assess yourself. Where can you add value? And that's where you need to step into the business and put the ego aside. Mind you, that's not all businesses, but I've seen that enough to where I've seen some challenges from that perspective.
I think Joe and I both try and do a good job of being self-aware around, like, where are we good and where are we not, and where are we weak, and how do we complement one another in the business? And, like, sure, yes, I have the CEO seat, but, like, I can tell you today, if Joe and I were both given the same business and both made GMs of 2 different businesses that look the exact same, I guarantee you Joe's would grow at a quicker rate than mine today, right? I mean, Joe is just a far better operator, executor, and understands what the value creation levers are to pull inside of these businesses. And he's doing an incredible job at it. I think Joe and I, a framework we use, Jackie, that helps us maintain, like, show up to the right conversations in the right way, is this, like, in family business, you always talk about, and people talk about these 3 hats that we all wear, right? One of those hats is Joe and I are family members, we're brothers, right? Another hat is we're both employees in this business, right? We both have different roles with different responsibilities as employees. And then we're both shareholders, right? And there's certain rooms where as shareholders, we're equal, right? And we make conversations, shareholder decisions as shareholders, as equal partners. As employees, I might be in the CEO seat, he might be in the COO seat. So maybe that means, like, I have decisions over some things that maybe may or may not agree with that are in the employee hat. And then, of course, we're brothers, where, like, that's a relationship, that's a hat that matters a ton too. You got to make sure that you're spending time investing in that relationship, because I think, what's the whole point of all this if we ruin our brother relationship because we're fighting over the other hats we wear, right? Like, what's the whole point of the thing,
It could be very lonely at the top in that way, right? Like, if you completely decimate your familial relationships and building a business that you have no one to share it with, what's the point? But I am very curious to learn how both of you cultivated this self-awareness. How do you guys think you developed that? Developed getting to know what you were good at and what you weren't, and when it was time for you to step in and when it was time to give responsibility to your brother or to someone else in the business?
I think one thing that helps Joe and I is, like, we're super comfortable giving each other feedback, which is great, actually, because, like, we'll say things to each other in ways to each other that you probably would never say to someone else in a professional environment. But you can do that because it's coming from a place of, like, I want to see Joe be as successful as possible and have the biggest impact in the business as possible. And similarly, Joe will call out my blind spots and be like, you're not taking this feedback well. You're not listening. You're not hearing me, right? And we can be direct with each other in a way that probably to an outsider, if they were sitting in and listening to our conversations, and like, holy cow, these guys are punching each other in the face. But I think that level of candor, it helps us immensely with creating alignment and then making sure that, like, we're both very aware of how we're showing up every day. I think it prevents either of us from having blind spots because the other is always very comfortable sharing what they're seeing and observing and how we're showing up every day.
Chris is very intentional around scheduling the time for us to sit down and think through, like, hey, Joe, in this conversation, like, I'm wearing this hat and this is why, like, just throughout all those conversations and all the intentionality around these conversations throughout the years has led us to this point. It isn't just because, oh, we're brothers, so we can have these, I've seen brothers have very candid conversations and walk away and hate each other and not like each other. Chris and I can have these very candid conversations, but still walk away and have a good working relationship and personal relationship. That was from the intentionality of Chris over the years, making sure that it worked out in that way.
Well, it's something to say about, the value of having experience before going into business because that is one thing that you guys do have, is that you both kind of lived your own career paths before coming into the business. It probably does make sense that your individual experiences gave you just more self-awareness and more tools to be able to better communicate with each other later on in life. Not that it was so much later. It seems like you guys both got in when you were in your 20s, but still, just having that distance probably gave you tools that you wouldn't have had otherwise. All right, so let us pivot. Nexstar helped you guys a lot, helped you with the processes. But I'm curious if there was anything else you had to implement to break the $100 million mark, because a ton of businesses are on Nexstar and they hit 35, 45, 50, 75, but 100 is still, it's pretty rare. It's a big deal. So once you mastered the Nexstar processes, were there any tools or strategies that you also brought on to supplement your growth essentially?
Nexstar was just a component of the growth. There's so many different inflection points that Chris mentioned. One of them I'll just to give ServiceTitan a quick shout out. Just pre-ServiceTitan, all of, the tracking that I was talking about when I was a sales manager, that was all done in Excel spreadsheets. That was people just every single day manually looking in our old software. How many bids did we run? What did we close? So many manual processes. Part of this was Nexstar, implementing Nexstar, not on ServiceTitan, took a ton of manual labor and work. Once we moved on ServiceTitan and ServiceTitan's reporting functionalities and capabilities, it made us so much more efficient, saved us so much more time. We could redeploy all that, zero value add data entry to actual value add portions of the business. So ServiceTitan was a key component of our growth journey, getting on a good software that can support us and support the processes that we have. Some of the things that we did that maybe weren't in the Nexstar model or is not as common amongst trades companies is just something like the appliance repair. So that helped our growth journey quite a bit, was adding the appliance service line, helped us get new customers, acquire new customers, relatively inexpensive to acquire customers with appliance repair. That was a pretty big factor in our growth here in St. Louis. Today we run 150 appliance calls a day in St. Louis, and most of those customers are new customers. And so we get them in the door and we can start serving them in other ways. And for HVAC, plumbing, and electrical, there's been a multitude of different, aspects of, the growth journey. I still think we have a lot of opportunity to grow in our St. Louis market. And I say that just because that's based on a proxy of our membership growth. Our membership base is still growing at over 20% a year in St. Louis, despite still being the largest residential home service provider. So I think we've got a lot of runway left here. So I don't think we're not at our ceiling. We're still years away from the ceiling here. Chris, I don't remember where this came from or how we made the decision to branch into Nashville in 2020. I think the wind was just blowing in that direction, and it sounded good, and so we picked Nashville. But we knew that, hey, we wanted to expand outside of St. Louis. And I'll let Chris tell the story of the Nashville expansion and why we decided to take that.
Before Nashville, just another comment I'll make. And Joe, together with Ann, our controller, Katie, our CFO, leads like our budgeting process every year, Jackie. And I can tell you too, like, our growth isn't by accident, right? Every fall, we're building a plan that we're going to do execute the following year, and we're calling our shot. We're saying this is what we're going to do across every business unit, across every trade, in every market, and here's exactly how we're going to do it. And I think our budgeting approach is very granular, and it's like a building blocks, bottoms up based approach, right? So it's not me, Chris, saying, hey, everybody, we're going to grow 20%, or we're going to grow 30%. Go make it happen. Ready, break, right? It's getting all the right stakeholders broadly defined in a room, the ops leaders, the GMs, right? Our marketing team who's going to generate the opportunities, the calls that come in. And it's setting realistic goals around each of these building blocks, from opportunities to service calls we're running. And we're going to look at conversion rates, and we're going to look at average tickets, and we're going to look at lead turnover rates, right? And we're setting goals around each of these things. And then we're very intentional around the processes we're going to put in place that map to those goals, those measures of success. And then when we close a month, this is probably one of my favorite things. When we close a month, right, It used to be, right, the old way we budget before we took this building blocks approach, it used to be we'd close the month, and if we didn't hit our goal, it'd be like, well, it's marketing's fault, or maybe it's apps. I don't know. Nobody could really diagnose exactly where the miss happened. Today, if we miss budget in a given brand, we can drill down to exactly which department missed budget, and then we can go a layer deeper and say which individual field pros didn't hit goal, right? Or was it marketing that didn't get us enough opportunities? And so we're very able to diagnose and pinpoint exactly where the misses happened, which then allows us to take action to address whatever the miss is, right? And make sure that it doesn't repeat the following year. And I think that level of intentionality around the budget process is just critical for you to run a business and not be blind. And those budgets map to our daily huddle, right? So when we're sitting in daily huddle every day, for every brand, right? We can look and see, like, today, did we hit our budgeted goal today? And how are we pacing for the month, right? So that this visibility, and again, this is in part available because of ServiceTitan and the technology that we now have available, but being able to have this real-time visibility is critically important to driving this dang bus and not being blind.
I love that you mentioned that, by the way, that you map all your budgeting stuff to your daily huddles, because I think that it's so easy to say, this is what we're going to do next year, and then like never look at it again. So I love that you integrate it into your daily processes.
I would bet, if I had to guess today, and we've looked at this over the years, like I would guess our market share in St. Louis, so St. Louis, $100 million, a little over $100 million. Our market share in St. Louis, I would pay is like mid-single digits, call it like 5 to 7%. Right. And so like there's so much opportunity right here in our backyard. But as we got bigger, we started to say, okay, we're in a mature market. I expect growth rates in St. Louis to slow down. I don't think we can sustain 35, 40% growth rates forever when we're, getting scale. So we said, well, why don't we need to find a new market where we can take what we've learned, take the playbook that we've deployed. We see the success we've had here. How do we replicate that somewhere else? And Nashville was 5 hours away. It was it was a market that was growing a ton. People were moving there, good home ownership rates, good household incomes. So we kind of just did a little bit of that and went down
there. Was
there.
a lot of direct flights, Chris. That was important.
A lot of direct flights. That was important.
A lot of direct flight. Yeah. That's a very smart decision that's a very smart thing to check before you do it. Great job.
Yes. Yeah. So we launched on it. I mean, it was cool. We started at zero. And then last year we had a business that was almost 13 million in revenue, over 50% gross margins, right, from zero. And then we invested, we were just talking about this recently internally. It cost us $5.3 million of cash in, right, to build a 12.5 million top line business with over 50% gross margins. And we continue to keep the toggle set to growth in that market, because for me, it's less exciting to optimize a $12, $13 million business for profitability than it is to say, let's keep that toggle set to growth, get to 40 or 50, and then we can think about shifting towards optimizing for profitability. But we're investing in leadership, talent, marketing. I mean, just to give you an example, like even on day one, when we moved to Nashville, before we had a single customer, we bought a 20,000 square foot building, a mile east of downtown, awesome warehouse, right in the rail yards, because we're thinking long-term. And we wanted to make sure we're making investments that reflected sort of our vision for that market and the growth ambition in that market. And facilities was one example.
That's so cool. So you guys basically were able to, with the profits from growing Hoffman Brothers, you were able to make the call in 2020. Let's start from scratch, implement all these playbooks, and turn the growth engine on. That's very cool. I never heard it explained like that, and it makes me very excited.
And the math people do, Jackie, right? I mean, so if we were to buy a business, you could say, okay, well, buying a 12 million, make the math easy, a $10 million business that makes $1.5 or $2 million a year. Well, I might have to go pay 8x for that $2 million EBITDA business, whatever that. I might have to pay $16 million for that $2 million EBITDA business. Whereas we can say, well, wait, it only costs us $5.3 million, and we can build a business that has that financial profile. So it's a much more efficient use of your capital. The downside, I think critics would say, well, it's slow. It took 5 years. If you're a private equity group or a sponsor and you've got to deploy more cash than that, sometimes buying just makes more sense because it's faster. It's a quicker path.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more bloody to kick it off, opposed to starting from fresh. You said the private equity word, so we're going to pivot to that, because I'm sure once you guys started growing Hoffman Brothers, you started getting phone calls left, right, and center, like, hey, we want to buy your business. So I'd love to hear how you approach that and what your feelings about private equity in the trades are right now.
Listen, I don't think private equity is inherently good or bad, just like I don't think family businesses are inherently good or bad. I think ultimately it comes down to the people and individuals that are making decisions in that business and how they're balancing the needs of their team members, the customers they're serving, right? The company, the organization itself. I think in general, it's been good for the industry because it's elevated the bar around people's expectations, right? For the service level they're going to get, for responsiveness, for technology. It's also raised price levels, which is good for us, good for everybody in the market, right? Because that allows us to preserve the margins we need to be able to invest in our business and treat people the way we want to with compensation and benefits and new tools, training, technology, all of those things. That being said, you can also see over these last few years, you can see the private equity groups that were building businesses that weren't very durable, that really are struggling, right? There's a ton that are on the ropes and not performing well. And there's an equal number. I'd say the camp split, right? 50-50 of the 76 platforms that exist across this country. I'd say about half of them are winning. They're doing really well. They're performing well. They have high organic growth rates. They've bought high quality brands. They're integrating them thoughtfully. And there's others who just thought they would mash a bunch of stuff together, cut costs, thought this would be easy, but these businesses are freaking hard, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're an institutional investor or whether you're a family business, you have to show up and do the hard work that's required every freaking day to make sure you're winning every freaking day, every week, that then turns into winning for the year. But if you're not doing that work, right, then it doesn't matter how big your fund is, right? You're not going to be successful.
You know, sometimes PE is talked about as the boogeyman. You always hear the horror stories. Those are the things you're going to hear. Those are the things that are going to make the headlines. You know, you're going to hear the technician, I left this company because, you know, it was bought by PE and they did X, Y, Z and it was horrible. You know, at the same time, there was also another technician who stayed at that company who loved it and thinks that things are great. So you hear both sides of the coin. And I've learned a lot from PE. There's a few big PE shops here in St. Louis. And I know some of the GMs at the local PE shops, and I learn a lot from them. I love calling them and say, hey, how do you guys do it over there at the $3 billion PE shop? Because you guys clearly, you know, for the ones that are doing it well, I can learn something from you. So I'm glad they're here.
You guys also have acquisitions in your business model, right? Like you've absorbed other local businesses in the 10 years that you guys have been at the helm, right?
We've done two. Yep. Two acquisitions. The first was in 2023. We bought it was a $12 million 85-year-old roofing business, 12 million in revenue, Ferguson Roofing. And that's been a fun run. Last year, we finished a little above 25 million and, you know, went from $1.2 million of EBITDA to 3.5 million of EBITDA in that business. So that's been a really exciting, fun run in roofing. And we're super excited about roofing and roofing greenfield. So that's something we're excited to sort of acquire that expertise, that foothold into a new vertical. And we think there's a lot of growth potential there. And then the second acquisition was a little over a year ago, October of 24. We acquired Blue Sky Plumbing, Heating, Cooling up in Denver, Colorado. And that team has about 120 team members or so. It's doing about 25 million or so of revenue when we bought it. We had single digit growth up there in 2025, but big opportunities still in front of us. And back to where we started the conversation, a lot of challenging, just change management's tough, right? As we think about unlocking value in that business and driving changes that we need to drive in the operation and marketing and call center. It's all tough and challenging, and we've still got a lot of work to do there.
It's interesting how private equity has come into the conversation. It's such a big thing that we talk about on this show, but from my perspective, and please let me know if I'm incorrect, it feels like you guys you've kind of got this pillar business, Hoffman Brothers, and you're using it to grow similar businesses in your surrounding area. So you're kind of taking this almost PE-like strategy to growth, but not quite PE. Am I making sense?
Totally. And I'd say the other thing we're thinking about doing is like just even on the shared services side. So as we acquire these things, we're putting them all on ServiceTitan, and we're saying, hey, how do we think about what resources we can share around call center, accounting and finance, procurement, marketing, right? And it just allows us to get a lot more operating leverage on shared resources that we can spread across these businesses. Joe, what would you add?
There's a lot that we could learn from PE. Some of these PE groups that have bought and integrated hundreds of businesses. And, you know, our first meaningful HVAC plumbing electrical acquisition partnership out in Denver, Colorado. We look back over the last year and a half, what would we do differently? What were some of the scars? You know, we did a lot of slow changes over the course of a year and a half, just like death by 1,000 cuts. Whereas talking to some of these PE groups, like, how did they do it? We were afraid when we went in to just really come in and like say, hey, this is how we do it. This is our playbook. We wanted to make sure we didn't want to rock the boat too much. We wanted to make sure that the acquisition was successful. But in having that more, I'll say, timid approach to the acquisition, it actually worked out being more painful of doing, a change a month. Whereas if I could go back, it's like, hey, I would come back in and on day one, it's like just going to be very transparent. We're coming in with, it might not be the good, right terminology, but we're coming in with a hatchet. And this is how we do things. And we're all going to operate under the same playbook, the same way. And because we know that this model works. Not saying what you're doing is bad, because it's not, but like, hey, we want to unify and we want to have a similar model moving forward. Yeah, same processes, because just like any organization, I want to be able to compare apples to apples. What are my KPIs for plumbers in Blue Sky in Denver versus Hoffman Brothers in St. Louis versus Hoffman Brothers in Nashville? In order to do that, we have to have the same ServiceTitan setup, the same instance, like all of these things that we should have changed on day one. So it was a learning opportunity for us, where we're coming in and, next time we'll be driving a lot of that change early on and not spreading it out over the course of a year and a half.
I love how honest you guys are about about learning opportunities, and you frame them like learning opportunities, which I think is fantastic.
I mean, I learned that from a guy at one of the GMs at Apex. He was telling me,
amazing.
this is how we do it. We bring a team of 20 people on board for a small little acquisition, and we just change everything on day one. Not saying I want to do that, but it's like, hey, that's just an entry. Kind of shared with me, some of what they do from a high level. And it was just interesting, their perspective, and those, could learn a little something from them, because they've done it hundreds of times.
Well, what I also like about this model that you're implementing, like same processes, same thing across all the businesses, you're also creating a ton of opportunities for your employees. Because with every new acquisition, you are creating different opportunities for them to go into manager positions, maybe in new locations, or so I feel like when the processes are uniform across those different locations, it's easier to move people around. Is that something that you even thought about?
If you have the same membership, you're selling the membership structure is the exact same in all of our locations. It's a lot easier to share best practices and share that, hey, this is our training that we do on how to sell memberships and what to do. And here's the back office process, because it's the same everywhere. Whereas, if you were to cobble together all these businesses and everybody has a different membership plans with different visits and different things included, it's like just going back to, like, if you have different membership plans, how do you merge a call center? Do you expect a CXR or, in our case, whether it be a CXR or an agentic tool, to be able to know like all of the different, membership benefits for for 20 different locations? I mean, just that alone makes it very hard to merge a call center if you have 20 different membership plans. So just there's a ton of benefits to, streamlining and making sure all the processes are the same across the board.
You said the second magic word, Joe, and then we're going to start wrapping up. I want to hear your guys' thoughts on AI. Obviously, as the hot ticket item, everybody is really excited about it. There's an insane amount of software coming out that enables business owners like yourselves to streamline operations. I want to hear how you guys are strategically thinking about AI and how you are planning to bring it into Hoffman Brothers and the other companies that you've acquired or that are in your atmosphere.
As you said, it's exciting and moving fast, and it's almost overwhelming, because I'm sure if business owners who are listening to this are probably getting 20 emails a week with, whatever AI company or tool that's promising them the world, whether it's sales training and coaching, call centers, right? That's a huge one. AI call centers, you name it. There's like an endless number of tools. And it's really hard, I think, for a lot of home service business owners to be able to discern quality among a sea of these AI offerings, right? That all promise you the world, right? And all have really slick looking sales decks, right? And I think it can get really challenging. We've been slow to adopt and implement, but then when we decided to go all in, we really jumped in about a little over a year ago, particularly on AI voice, helping us with capacity management, autonomous outbound marketing campaigns. But I think the important thing, Jackie, for a lot of folks is whatever tool you use or pick, you need to let data drive your decision making. I think too many people leap into these things blind and implement a tool, and they didn't have a baseline measurement of their performance around whatever that tool was intended to impact. They didn't have a baseline measurement of what performance looked like pre-adoption of that tool, and then weren't able, therefore, to measure post-adoption. Are they seeing the result they would expect to receive from that tool? And I think one of the things we've been really thoughtful about, whatever the tool is that we're implementing, we need to be able to say with confidence that this is improving outcomes for our business, improving outcomes for our customers, improving outcomes for our team, if applicable. And absent the ability to do that, I'm just really hesitant to just continue to lean more into tools you don't have visibility of the impact ultimately.
And
That's
Jackie,
a really good call out. Go for it, Joe.
That, I have a friend of mine and a peer. He's a business owner, owns a smaller company. And he was telling me, he's like, hey, I use now this sick AI call center, and I'm looking at the numbers, and I've got like an 80 or 90% booking rate. This is killing it. This is better than my CSRs. And he's super excited. I'm like, dude, that's awesome. Because wow, that's really, hey, let's sit down, let's talk about it. So get on a call with him. And as we dig into it, I'm like, so, hey, is that raw or is that, no, that's like bookable opportunities. And I said, okay, so well, who defines bookable opportunities? Well, the agentic tool is defining bookable opportunities. And I said, well, hey, why don't we look at this raw? And then we looked at it raw, it's like a 10% booking rate. And I said, well, hey, is that good? 10%? He's like, well, what was it before? And then he starts looking at his raw booking rates prior to the agentic tool when it was just CSRs, and his raw booking rates are, closer to 35%. And so, picking the right tool and like just knowing there's a lot of tools that are out there. Some are good, some are not. So like one of the things that Chris mentioned is like how to discern. You need to know your numbers before you dive in to know and define, like, is this good? And sticking to like agentic call center, like we dipped our toe in the water first where, hey, we're only going to do this for after hours, right? So we can compare to minimize the impact. We're not going to go all in at first, and then we're going to compare that raw booking rate after hours to our raw booking rate pre, agentic AI after hours. So we can really get comfortable with it before we dive in. We found a lot of success, and I'll credit Chris to this because he was the one who pushed hard to adopt an agentic AI call center. I was very hesitant because I just thought, hey, we're in, especially in St. Louis, Missouri, people aren't going to be super prone to want to talk to an AI agent, but we've actually seen a lot of success, and we have the data to prove that it has not had a negative impact on our booking rates, and it's worked out really well. But I can't say the same for everybody, and everybody's experience. So it's just right now, it's important you vet your partner.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call that you both said, like knowing what exactly the tool is going to be helping you with, what your KPI was before implementing the tool and what it was after, and being really meticulous about tracking that and making sure that you're not seeing a really sparkly dashboard that's telling you one thing. Yeah, it's really, again, 5-6 years doing this podcast. There is no one magic wand that you can just wave and just solve that one business problem for you. You have to be really strategic about it.
Totally. And I actually think deploying AI too is like, it's much harder than I think people think. I think there, like sometimes there's a perception of like, you just plug it in and it'll be great and we go live in a week or two. I think like just the amount of training and even the engineering that has to happen to make sure you're connecting it to all the right data endpoints inside of ServiceTitan and other systems, right? Whatever it is, it's actually, I think, a lot more complicated to have this stuff be really high impact. And so, I'm always weary of anybody who promises you the world in short order. It just doesn't work that way.
To add to that,
Yeah.
like there should be nothing. If somebody's telling you they have an out of the box solution, be very wary. Jackie, I tend to get too much into the minutia, but this is where just like your ServiceTitan setup is so important in the job types that you have and what, the agentic AI, making sure that it's booking the right job types, and you have all of the back end set up in ServiceTitan is a critical piece to making sure that it works properly. And project management and change management is really hard rolling things out. Like getting our field team members on board, even though, it doesn't directly impact them, but getting in front of a group of field professionals and saying that, hey, we're going to answer all of our inbound calls are going to be AI first. It's like you get a lot of really concerned individuals. So you got to come prepared with data to show them why this is good, why it isn't going to hurt them, how it's going to help them. It's a beast when it comes to change management.
Yeah, I like that you circled this back to change management because it is incredibly interesting how the bigger your organization gets. I've experienced it with ServiceTitan, but like the bigger your organization gets, the more you have to kind of do a roadshow internally to explain why you're doing the things that you're doing. And I'm glad that you called out, Joe, that this is a really big process because we also have to talk then about like which projects do you have the bandwidth and are important enough for you to take on? Because there's only so much time in a year, in a month, in a quarter. So being really intentional about those big things that you're going to implement change on, because it's going to take a very big collective effort in order to do it. I do want to shout out that you guys have the Hoffman Brothers University, which has been going pretty well, and you have been getting new folks into the trades, which is so awesome. Is there anything you guys want to talk about that we didn't get a chance to? Do you want to talk a little bit about Hoffman Brothers University? Because just as we wrap up here.
At the end of the day, Jackie, I think at the end, our product in this industry is our people, right? And like which means you cannot possibly invest too much in your people, right? And that includes folks that are new to the trades, and we've created those pathways through our Enter the Trades programs. But it also includes the people that are on our team today. How are we making them all the best at their job and allow them all to rise to their full potential? And it's more than just folks who are turning wrenches and field pros, right? There's people in customer service and in accounting and in marketing that want to be the best in their field. And so as we think about learning across our whole business, I think it's every role, it's every location, it's every business. How are we training and developing people to be their best? It's an ongoing thing, but it's expensive too. And it's how do you balance sort of whatever you're going to invest in training, making sure it's going to those areas that are going to be highest impact and really meet the greatest need within the business.
I'll just say that finding and training tradespeople from scratch, like Chris said, is expensive, but where does it pay off? At least for us, when you look at retention data, we've had team members that have been going through HBU for the last 5 years. And from our very first plumbing class of, I think it was 7 or 8 students 5 years ago, every one of them is still employed with us. And some of them are our best performing plumbers. It is expensive, but on the flip side of that, we've seen really high retention rates and a lot of loyalty from those team members because we put a lot into them and they're giving it back.
That's awesome. That's an awesome stat. Congratulations. That is so cool. And it goes back to what I was saying. You got to figure out like what it is that you guys are going to focus on, what money you're going to spend resources on. Chris and Joe, thank you so much. You guys are very busy, so I appreciate you taking an hour out of your time to chat with me and to share some of your insight with our audience. You guys were fantastic, so thanks for joining me on Toolbox for the Trades.